You're about to learn the brush tool. What is the brush tool? The brush tool is Photoshop's painting tool, and it's designed to replicate painting on a canvas in real life. The first thing that you need to know about the brush tool is where it's at. So let's go ahead and pull up Photoshop right now. So as you can see, the brush tool is right here. If I wanted to use it, I would just click on it. The other thing that I can do is press B on my keyboard, and that brings up the brush tool as well. For this example, because we're going to be using a ton of the different brushes and also teaching a few different art tricks as well, I'm going to open up my Windows tab and I'm going to change my workspace over to painting. This workspace is designed to help you to be the most efficient and productive when you're doing art. So let's go ahead and get started on this brush tool. You might have noticed that when I clicked on the brush tool, up here at the top, you have your brush settings. If I click on this right here, it's going to come up with these different adjustments. So right here, I have my general brushes. You have your soft round brush. You also have your hard round brush. You can change the hardness levels right here. You can change the size of your brush right here. And you can also change the direction of your brush right here. So all of these different adjustments are easily shown in this section right here. There's also other ways that you can view your brushes. You can right click onto your canvas and it brought up all of these different settings. You can also view all of these settings over here on the right. So right here under brushes, I brought mine down. Yours might be up here, but I brought it down just because I know that I want you to be able to see it. But basically right here in this section, I have my size, I have my different settings as well. So if I right click right here, I have the ability to import my brushes. And so this is something that we're going to be able to use if we have downloaded already some brushes and want to import them in. The other way that we can use this is if we wanted to get more brushes. Adobe Photoshop actually has it where you select this get more brushes. It automatically pops up with this right here. Photoshop would just need you to sign in order to download all of these brushes, and they're all free and come with Photoshop. We took a little bit of a rabbit trail over here, but this is the third way that you can sort of look at your brushes, or if you want to quickly grab one and find it in a folder, this is another way to do that. I just showed you 3 different ways of viewing your brushes. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is adjusting your brushes. So let's go ahead and talk about that now. The way that you adjust your brushes, you can adjust them by changing the opacity right here. If I had this at full opacity, I'm going to draw my first line. I'm going to go from here to here. I just press shift on my keyboard to make a straight line. Let's say that I wanted to change the opacity and I turned it down to 22%. And I press shift. As you can tell that this obviously isn't nearly as bright as before. See-through. So let's go ahead and show you flow. Flow, let's say I do this. It builds on itself over and over again. We can also adjust the flow right here. The last thing that we can adjust in this top area that I do pretty often is this smoothing. If you have it very low smoothing, as you can tell, your lines are going to be a little bit more jaggedy. If I have my smoothing turned on, it's going to be a lot smoother. You see my cursor right here. You can see that it's 81. All that I have to do in order to quickly increase the size is press Alt on my keyboard and right click. And that's going to quickly change the size of my brush. That is the quickest and easiest way if you're using a mouse for painting in Photoshop. So let's say that you wanted to change the hardness. The way that you would do that is actually by dragging down and up. Vertically, horizontally changes your brush. So you would press Alt on your keyboard and then you would drag it up or down or side to side to change the sizes. And that red color, it does not mean that that's the color that you're using. It's just showing you as an example of what your brush is going to look like. And right here you can see it also gives you all the information live as you're changing your brush settings. And so let's say you wanted to make it so that you can see the cursor. You can go to Edit, Preferences, you go down here and you come up to Cursors. Once you click that, you'll be able to show the crosshairs in your brush tip. You'll be able to put it to whatever brush tip that you want. And you can also adjust the color right here. So let's say you didn't like the example brush to be red, you could change it to whatever color that you're wanting. So let's go ahead and exit out of that. And so if you'd want to show your crosshairs in your brush, that little spot in the middle, you would just check this box right here. The other way that you can make your brush bigger or smaller quickly in Photoshop is by selecting the brackets on your keyboard. So you do the right bracket and it makes it bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. So these are all multiple ways of changing the brush size. You could also come up here, change the brush size. And just like that, you just learned all about changing the size and hardness quickly in Photoshop. Great job. Okay, so let's talk about colors because you can't really use a brush without the colors. And so down here in this bottom section, you see there are these two colors. The one that's on the top, the foreground color, that's the one that we're using for our painting. So I'm just going to click it and this box comes up. Now we can choose to go with a brighter color by coming up here, a darker color by coming down. And so this is set up where it's going from no saturation to full saturation, and it's going from really light to really dark. So I hope that that makes it a little bit easier to understand. So now that we have the understanding of this, we can come over here to the hue, and we would be able to change that really quickly by clicking on it, by dragging it, and you can choose whatever color that you're wanting. Let's say that I really like this color. I can just press OK, and that's the color that I'm going to use to paint. So let's say that I already had some colors that I really wanted to use and they were in this photo. The way that I would quickly go about doing that is just when you're in the brush tool, if you press Alt on your keyboard, that would select a color. And so now, if I were to paint on top of this, that would be painting quickly with that color. And so if I wanted to make this canvas just like kind of fill it in as if it was painted by a brush, you can quickly do some brush strokes and make it the colors that you're wanting by pressing Alt and using your color picker. And that is a really awesome tool to have. You can also set your color swatches. I'm pulling them out so that you can see them. And let's say that I wanted to see which colors I've recently used. That would be right here. If I wanted to see some colors that I really like and that I want to save, I could add in my own folder and add in a bunch of colors for a specific piece of art. In order to use the HUD color picker, all you do for a Mac is you use Command, Option, Control, and then you left click or just normal click, and then that will bring up the color picker. If you're on a PC, you do Alt, which is right here, and Shift, which is right here. So Alt Shift, and then you right click, and that brings up the color picker. And so you can choose whichever color. You can change the hue and saturation all right here. The reason why the HUD color picker is nice is because let's say you're painting, instead of coming down, it's just a quicker shortcut to kind of stay in the same place that you're already at. So now we're going to go way more in depth on more brushes. We're going to create our own custom brush. We're going to do an art example together. I'm also going to quickly go over exporting and importing brushes. And so let's go ahead and get started on that. Come to our main page. I'm going to start a new canvas. That way you can just follow along. Within making a custom brush, you want to have a square. So start off with a square canvas. I have 1,000 by 1,000 and I'm just going to press create. So now that I created that, I'm just going to come up with a brush that I think would be a good brush for this example. For brushes, I typically recommend doing more round or triangles or squares, basic shapes. And so for this example, we're going to do a circle. And so let's go ahead and just come up with sort of a not perfect circle. Let's make it a little bit different. I'm going to change the size and the hardness. And for this circle, it's just not going to be the exact typical brush. And we're going to add some texture to it. And I think that even just that, I did 2 strokes. Let's say that that's all I wanted to do. I added a third. So let's say that that is the exact shape that I want to do. I would go to edit, and then I would do define brush preset. I would click that, and this comes up. Now I can name this brush custom and press OK. So now that I have this custom brush, this is what it looks like. I'm going to make it a lot smaller. So here's my brush. And all of the settings that you had, let's say when you started this, up at the top are going to be the settings for the brush preset. So the smoothing was already at 60%, which is pretty nice. And so let's go ahead and get more into the brush settings. So now I'm going to come over here to this brush settings section. I'm bringing it down, that way you can see it a little bit better. So the brush settings right here shows you basically all of the settings that you need for this brush. So let's go ahead and change it up a bit. So we're going to go to brush tip shape. One really interesting thing is if you look at this brush that we just created with just a couple strokes, it's just one circle. And so when you change the spacing down, really all you're seeing is just one circle. But Photoshop is combining it and changing the spacing to make it into one flowing shape. And so changing the spacing changes how close those circles are together, and it makes it a lot smoother. So let's say that we want to keep the spacing at 10 or even come down a little bit to like 6. Okay, so right here we can change the angle. Again, this is the second place to change the angle of the brush. We can change the texture of the brush. So right up here, let's say we wanted the texture to have some sort of other texture. We can add that in right here. Whatever texture you want. The transfer is another thing that you can change. You would be able to turn on, let's say, pen pressure if you're on a tablet, and just kind of adjust different things this way. So for the brush dynamics, you can make it so that the minimum roundness is a certain size, which keeps the consistency at the ends a lot more consistent. Smoothing, that's the same as up here. So you know how to do the smoothing already and what that means. You can make the edges more wet. So you can adjust your brushes and change them all within the brush settings. It just depends on what it is that you're wanting for your brush. And what I recommend is just go ahead and play around with it and have some fun. So we just quickly created a brush, and that's amazing. The next thing that I'm going to teach you is how to install brushes. Okay, so let's just say I wanted a specific type of brush and it's just for eyelashes. I could download that, and you could just go right here and you could do import brushes, and then you would find out where it is that your brushes are. And let's say right here I have this brush pack. I would press load, and then it would come up down here, and then you would see all of these eyelash brushes. All right, so now that we have our own custom brush, the next thing that I'm going to show you is how to export it. So let's go ahead and do that really quickly. I'm going to come up here to the brush settings right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down and I'm going to look at this brush. So this is my custom brush that I made. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select export selected brush. And now I'm just going to save this as an ABR file. And so let's say that if I ever wanted to use this same brush on my tablet and I had it on my PC, this is a way that I can either email it to myself or transfer it over on, and it would have the same brush or brush sets that I want. So you just press save, and then you would export your brush just like that. Appending default brushes just means getting back the brushes that you have. Let's say you want legacy brushes. Right here, these are some other brush options. So now you have lots of options for brushes. The next thing that we're going to do is just go through and make a little project together. And let's go ahead and get started on that. We're just going to be using our custom brush that we just made, and we're going to use it here in Photoshop. And so that's going to be fun. Let's try it out. So I'm going to use just this one brush, and basically what I did was I just downloaded this leaf and we're just going to paint it. But I don't want to paint on the black. Basically what I'm going to do, I just selected this color range right here and I copied it so that I could put it as its own layer, and then I pasted it there. Just to explain that really quickly, Control deselect. And so now that I have its own layer of just this white color, I'm going to paint on the top of it. So I'm going to do Control Shift N, and that is going to make a new layer. So that layer, I'm going to make it into a clipping mask. So I'm going to right click and come up here to clipping mask. And now that my clipping mask is here, I'm going to do Alt Shift and then right click, and I'm going to come over here to my color picker. And let's say that I want to come up with that color. I'm going to paint with my brush that we created. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it a bit bigger again. So I'm just going to right click and then bring it over. And so let's say that that's kind of what I'm wanting for this middle part. And then, so let's say I want to go for a darker color. I could come down and kind of do a darker color on the sides. This is showing a little bit more depth. Yeah, something kind of like this. I don't have to worry that much about this not coming out exactly how I want, because it's all on its own layer and it has a clipping mask and it's just coloring in the parts that I want, which is really easy. So let's go ahead and come to another color, kind of paint it in a little bit. And we're just literally using this brush that I just made. If I need to do undo, I just did Control Z. And this is making it way easier and just staying in the zone of painting. This is a fun little project that we're just gonna make. And I can tell that there's actually a lot of really cool texture in here. So let's go ahead and go for a brighter color in the middle. and I'm going to turn my opacity down. And that's just going to make it so that it looks like the sun is kind of hitting it in that spot. And it gives it a little bit more shape. So I just quickly colored that in, and let's say that that was about good, and I was like super stoked on that, and I felt like, you know, it didn't need a ton more work, which I can obviously add a lot more, but I think that that basically shows a quick example of how to use the paintbrush tools, and that shows how to quickly use some of the different shortcuts as well. So I painted that really quickly just by using my shortcuts that I already taught you and making my brush bigger, smaller, the hardness and the opacity all right here. That is the brush tool. I hope that you really enjoyed that and that was fun for you to see my process and see a brush that we just made together. You are now an expert at using brushes in Photoshop. Great job, and I will see you in the next lecture.